Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Bianca Go. I'm the moderator for this panel, but making a quick switch here to support Julie and the CAN team to introduce today's panel. I am a project manager at the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation and a co-chair for the Employment Community Practice here at CAN. I have black hair that goes past my shoulders. I am wearing a green jacket over a black turtleneck. We're so pleased that you can join us today for CAN's Connect Forum. Some individuals are still joining, but we will have a lot of information, so we'd like to get started. So we're going to go ahead and get started with today's panel. As you come into the Zoom room, we invite you to use the chat feature to share where you are joining us from and what kind of work you do, and if you're comfortable, to share your lived experience. As a reminder, we will be recording today's session. The recording will be posted to the CAN YouTube channel, and a link to the recording will be shared with you following the event. We've already started recording. Um, so I will be skipping. We're just doing some quick changes here. Today's forum is entitled Intersectionality and Accessibility. And today we're going to explore how to ethically engage communities and meaningfully address intersectionality in accessibility work, including examining how disability intersects with multiple identities, including race, gender, queerness, and others in the Canadian context, and what leaders can do to respond. So thank you for joining us today. I'll be doing two land acknowledgements today. So I'll do one on behalf of CAN. As we gather virtually today, we recognize that we join this meeting from many traditional and ancestral territories of Indigenous nations. These lands are home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities whose cultures, knowledge, and relationships continue to teach us. CAN, currently in Ottawa, Ontario, is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. A land acknowledgement is a living statement, one that evolves alongside our understanding and carries meaning each time it is shared. It is both a reflection and commitment. I invite you to look up whose land you reside on if you haven't already. The link is in the chat, and we all share, which is whose dash land dash welcome. We all share a responsibility as inhabitants to understand our relationship to the land and its peoples and histories. Um, I will do my land acknowledgement here. So I'd like to acknowledge the land on which I'm currently on, which is Mi'kma'ki. The traditional and ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq people. As a member of CAN, who is located in Nova Scotia, I am committed to the reconciliation, decolonization, healing, and building of relationships in our communities through partnering with and learning from local Indigenous people. As visitors on this land, we recognize that land acknowledgements are only one way we can work towards truth and reconciliation. I believe consistent and meaningful action must continue. I encourage everyone here to be curious and continue to learn about the histories of Indigenous peoples and the land that they are on. For this particular panel, I would like to call to action panelists and audience members to think about today's topic as it impacts our Indigenous communities and what actions we can take to move forward, to move reconciliation forward. Okay. Have some housekeeping items for here. So the Canadian Accessibility Network is a national cross-sectorial collaboration, an initiative of the Accessibility Institute at Carleton University, working to advance accessibility for peoples with disabilities across Canada. While we do endeavor to be a bilingual network, today's event will be delivered in English only. For those who prefer French, Live digital translation is available as well as ASL. Okay, just clarify. Uh, we recognize, so for the language and accessibility support, so for ASL and OSL interpreters, attendees who requested ASL have been given multi-pin privileges. This lets you pin interpreter videos to keep them visible. We'll also spotlight the active interpreters throughout the event. For live captioning, English captions are available through Zoom. To enable, click the arrow next to the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Full transcripts in English and French can be accessed through links, and we'll post them in the chat. These will open in a browser window. For technical support, if you experience issues with captions or anything else, please send a message in our chat, and our event support team will be there to help. For the chat settings, we recognize that the Zoom chat can be distracting for some members and panelists. If this is your experience, we encourage you to look at the chat bottom at the bottom of the toolbar, click the small arrow next to the chat button, and unclick or uncheck it to to the show chat previews. This is a local setting, meaning it only affects your screen. You will see a red number badge on the chat icon when messages arrive, but you won't get the pop-up text bubbles. So that was all the housekeeping. I know there was a lot there, but we're really excited to get this panel started. So I've introduced myself, but I would love for our panelists to start getting pinned into this chat. And I would like to start with asking Shanice to introduce herself.
Thanks, Bianca. And hello, everyone. My name is Shanice Pereira. My pronouns are she, her. I am also joining from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. A quick visual description of me. I am a multiracial woman of African, Chinese, and European ancestry. So I've got tan skin, few freckles, and a beauty mark next to my nose. And I have a thick mop of black curly hair that falls past my shoulders, and I'm wearing a white blouse today. A little bit about me. I am the Outreach and Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Coordinator for Propeller Dance, which is a contemporary inclusive dance organization based in Ottawa with a professional dance company and education classes, both by and for folks with and without disabilities. Outside of that, I am also a playwright, director, and theater artist. I'm really excited to talk about intersectionality and accessibility, as this is a topic close to my heart, both professionally and personally. I hold many intersecting identities, as I am the first Canadian born in my Guyanese family. I hold ancestry from over 10 countries. I grew up with a mix of Afro-Guyanese, Chinese Guyanese, and Canadian traditions, and I am also a bisexual woman, and I am neurodivergent. Um, I come at things from a lot of different perspectives, and that will help inform all of the knowledge that I'm here to share. I am not an expert, I'm a student of the world, and I'm excited to engage in this discussion today. Thanks, Bianca.
Thanks so much, Shanice. Now I would like to welcome Carmel. Your mic is off, Carmel.
Okay. Ani, bonjour, Carmel Nindijnikas. My name is Carmel Whittle, and I am a guest here on the Algonquin Anishinaabe territory in Ottawa, Ontario. And I identify as Two Spirit, queer, indigenous. I am non status, disenfranchised, Mi'kmaq, originally from Newfoundland and Labrador, and identify, and as she, her. I'm white skinned, brown, and salt and pepper hair. I wear glasses. I work in a number of different areas. I have different hats that I wear in community. But I'm an instructor for the Circle of Art with the OPERG Ottawa. group, and I also am the director of the No Borders Art Festival here in Ottawa. Um, I also I was diagnosed with PTSD quite a number of years ago, and struggle with learning with a learning disability. And I'm overjoyed to be, and I'm honored to be here with everybody today. And I look forward to the conversation. G. McWedge, thanks, Bianca.
Thank you, Carmel. And our last panelist is Terrence. Terrence, please introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, my name is Terrence Ho. I identify as he, him. I'm Chinese, got short black hair, wearing an orange shirt right now. I'm normally based in Toronto, but I am joining all of you today from Hong Kong, which is the city of my birth and of my ancestors, and where I'm currently staying to be close to family because it was just Chinese New Year in the last 2 weeks. Professionally, I am the head of global sales education operations at Braze Mobility, where we focus on making the world more accessible through assistive technology. And so, our company, we've designed and manufacture blind spot sensors and backup cameras for wheelchairs. And personally, I am a third generation double duty caregiver. So, my mom and my grandma were also family caregivers. And this identity were just shaped by the years I spent caregiving for my younger brother, Torrance, who lived with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, our mom, Mimi, who was diagnosed and died of stage 4 lung cancer, and then also a family friend and former personal support worker to my brother, who was diagnosed with dementia. And being in Hong Kong right now reminds me that accessibility isn't just unique to Canada, it is truly a global human experience. Because whether I'm in Toronto or here in Hong Kong, things like the physical barriers, access to technology, navigating the healthcare system, and the need for workplace flexibility remains the same. So I'm excited to be part of this discussion.
Thank you so much, Terrence. Thank you to the panelists who have joined us today. We are really looking forward to dig into the questions. However, before we start, I did want to start with putting some definitions out there so that we all start on the same page. So the first one that I actually want to start with is intersectionality. So intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a scholar and writer on civil rights and civil rights activists. She termed the term intersectionality in her 1989 paper, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics. In this essay, Kimberly uses the essay to explain the oppression of African American women as they experience violence, bias, and violence. Today, we see the term intersectionality used as a lens to explain the different power dynamics that come with race, gender, class, or other identities. I will note there are some links to some of the things and definitions that I'll be going through today, so feel free to look at them to learn more about the terms we're going to look at. Another term we may encounter is about intersecting identities. So, intersecting identities are the identities that a person has or identifies with, and looking at the different ways that these identities interact with each other. So, for example, I identify as a second generation Canadian with a cultural heritage of being Filipino Chinese. I'm an eldest daughter, a caregiver at times, employed, a university educated, cisgendered woman. If we look at my identities, we look at how they overlap, push and pull together, leading to the power dynamics that Kimberly exposed and explored through intersectionality. It challenges and makes us think about things such as how does my identity as a second generation Canadian interact with my cultural identity as a Filipino Chinese woman? How does being employed collide with my duties to be a caregiver and eldest daughter to immigrants? These are identities that navigate the world and how I experience them, and ultimately how I might process or experience privilege or oppression. It was important for me to define the difference between intersectionality and intersecting identities because they have two very specific definitions and often get misconstrued. So that's okay, but we're all here to learn. The last term that I want to define before we really dig into the questions from the panel is tokenism. So, tokenism, as the Oxford Dictionary states, is the fact of doing something only in order to try to show that you are including people from minority groups, but not in a way that is really sincere. In other words, including a very specific identity, whether that be race, gender, or sexual orientation, or any identity for the sake of being there and included. So, as we proceed through this panel, these terms may appear throughout our conversation, and I wanted to make sure that everyone here had the same knowledge and understanding. So, let's dig into the questions. You've already heard everyone and kind of the identities and the intersecting identities. So, the first question that I'm going to pose to all the panelists will be, what barriers do people with intersecting marginalized identities face when trying to have their voices heard? And Shanice, if you're okay, I'd love for you to go first.
Sure, I'm happy to start. When it comes to the biggest barriers, the first thing that always comes to mind to me is the lack of individual recognition. Oftentimes, um, these barriers come about because people are looking at things, especially within systems, from what's the most common, what's the most generalized, and you lose the individual focus. Intersecting identities don't exist in a box. And I can say, like for myself, there all of the different things that make up me interact with each other, and so I couldn't say, well, just interact with me as a woman because I'm also queer. I'm also of Guyanese descent. I all of the alsos really create these nuances and experience, and I think that creates a lot of barriers for folks when um, no one is when a lot of folks are not able to be heard for all of these intersecting moments and elements of self and are expected to just fit into whatever the common expectation or stereotype or assumption of an identity is.
Thanks for sharing that, Shanice. Carmel, would you be open to going next?
Sure. I think that there are so many barriers to speak about. I mean, I look at language with regards to the indigenous communities and certainly looking at, healthcare and what kind of care is available to many because language is, it's intricately connected to identity. Um, and just recognition around exactly what Shanice you were talking about, which is intersections. Again, I mentioned I'm white skinned. That in itself can hold barriers with regards to, in particular, working and sharing in indigenous communities, but also in the non-indigenous frameworks that are out in community. Oftentimes, there's assumptions made, and the first thing we see that can become a barrier is the color of our skin, which is extremely unfortunate, but it's a truth. And I think that oftentimes ageism, which is what I'm becoming extremely familiar with at the moment, are barriers. It's almost like you reach a certain age and all of those intersections play in a very different way than, let's say, when I was in my 30s. So it's a barrier to being able to, and then economic backgrounds, all of these things. Whether you've grown up in poverty, which was my case, and many others who are living very strained economic times around what they can afford to participate in, and what kind of platforms are in the mainstream system, who gets ahead, who doesn't, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, that's some of them.
Thanks, Carol. There's a lot, and I'm sure we'll dig into them a little deeper with the questions to come. Terrence, what about yourself?
I would have to echo some of what Carmel said. And then in terms of like in the lens as a caregiver, helping my loved ones navigate the system and kind of seeing those like exact barriers that Carmel mentioned around like language. So for example, uh, even though our mom's second language is English, it's certainly not her strongest point. So then when she was diagnosed with cancer and then needing to like understand what the doctor's saying, it's not it's not really straightforward to someone that English may not be the first language. And then the other piece to language too is also in the healthcare system, which also creates a accessibility barrier too, is just the lingo or the jargons that are used or the acronyms that are used in healthcare. And then for someone that needs to then navigate the healthcare system is also a huge barrier to then not really understand the language that's actually being used in that particular system. So in this case, healthcare. And then the other piece around economics, like based on our income, whether or not then we could access the appropriate medical services and technologies that we need to actually live a life that's a quality life. Yes, we do have some funding support, but then for those that may not be able to get more access to certain technologies and medical equipment, um, that also are barriers as well that we face. So I would say those are some of the things.
Thanks, Terrence. Something that both you and Carmel mentioned was about the systems. That systems um, are built in a way that maybe our identities just can't navigate because that's not what we're accustomed to. That's not what we used to. Terrence, you brought the comment about language with your mother, and then having to kind of be a translator or even just an understanding of the context. I've definitely had that experience myself, being like, this sentence they understand as written, but they don't understand what that deeper meaning is. And I can imagine what that looks like in a health system. So on the topic of systems, and this is great, is how do systems of racism, sexism, homophobia, and colonialism continue to contribute to accessibility gaps in Canada? And what efforts are currently in play to address these systems? Carmel, if you're okay, I'd love for you to go first and address this question.
Yeah, well, it's a topic that's can I say close to my heart. I mean, ultimately, um, when we look at all of the isms, we're looking at colonized systems that were put in place hundreds of years ago, and specifically to keep us uh, often away from exactly where we are, which is identifying all the intersections of what makes up who we are as human beings, which is the ultimate goal, I would imagine, for many of us, is to be seen as human beings. And so racism, I mean, which is rampant. One of the areas in particular is if we look at the Indian Act and the significance that the Indian Act is one of the most racist documents in this country, and that is still alive and still on well. And until we look at, because I work a lot with the Truth and Reconciliation and the 94 Calls to Action, which most of us know was collected through the stories of those that have been extremely oppressed, either through residential schools or 60 Scoop survivors. However, globally, that inquiry that arrived to these 94 recommendations certainly open up a doorway to all the areas of oppression, because that's ultimately what was experienced in these colonial acts of creating a division and misunderstanding, and certainly not being able to to narrow in on what are the real issues, because once we have the system um, somewhat aligned with other than the mainstream system, because there are many different ways of learning, and one of them certainly is around land sovereignty and being able to go back to practices that have been used since time immemorial to help heal others. And we're still um, very, very much systemically caught in a system that has been uh, often contrived so we can't break down the barriers that we just spoke about on a scale that needs to happen to make the changes systemically in the way that we we practice. There needs to be a practice. There needs to be protocols that involve all people, and often there's great resistance to that because we're looking at a system from top to bottom. And in the indigenous way, it's usually often the practices of the circle, which means we're all equally engaged. There's no hierarchy. And that system, the hierarchy system, certainly continues to create barriers that many people in community struggle to get the kind of attention that needs to be given. And yeah, so as a collective, I think I'm always hopeful, if I could say that, about the alterations that need to happen societally. And that's why it's so great to have this conversation. And I look forward to hearing where other people are coming from. Thank you.
Thanks, Carmel. I'm gonna put you a bit on the spot. You mentioned the system of instead of going from top down, but a little more circular. Do you have an example for us that you could share?
Well, where I'm working presently is an example with Oberg Ottawa, which is basically I worked with an elder circle, and we put into action altering the constitution. It's still in the workings because, of course, it's going to engage the hierarchy system. That in order for us to make the changes that are necessary, we also adopted the seven sacred teachings as part of our protocol and practice within the organization, so that all of our interactions with marginalized students and those that are in community is based on sitting.
How do I turn the audio?
Sorry.
I think you're okay, Carmel. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So that is something that has been collected amongst all of us in our conversations and discussions, which is that we would hold meetings and any operations that are significant to marginalized peoples in those circles, so that there is no leader. It's about everyone is equal within the circle, and given the opportunity to be able to share either their life experiences, their understanding, education-wise, what they can share to help support moving everything forward. So I also worked with the City of Ottawa around accessibility. Many people cannot get grants. They don't understand them. So it was part of our committee, that community committee, that broke apart all of the language, so that again, the hope is that many others can get engaged without having to go through the long process of not understanding most of the things that are for them to actually get more support economically in the arts and other areas, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for those examples. Shanice, I'd love to engage you in this question. What are your thoughts?
Thanks, Bianca, and thanks, Carmel, for your fantastic points. I really want to touch on what Carmel mentioned about like the disconnect when it comes to systemic changes, it can feel very daunting, very frustrating, because oftentimes there is this very big disconnect between the conversations happening in community spaces that often prioritize more gentle leadership and collaborative practice to the actual systems of hierarchy where we see things continuing on as they have been within these colonial systems. And I think a lot of that is because there aren't true and honest invitations being given to bring people in of different perspectives when it comes to systemic changes. It's very easy for things to continue when things are being done in a tokenistic way, and when the policies are being written without proper consultation or looking at ways to make them more accessible, even just from the get go, of taking the time to create forms. And as Carl mentioned, like, when the entry point into things itself is not accessible, how do you expect anything afterwards to be? And another element I want to touch on with this, kind of branching off from what Carl mentioned about, colonialism really affecting these systems. I thought from my perspective as well, coming from a Guyanese family where there is also colonization and that really plays into the socialization and understanding of things. Like I grew up in a family where the term disability came with a lot of stigma, a lot of stereotyping. The concept of mental health did not exist for a long time. And this notion of perceived weakness being like if you can't do everything all at once, which is not possible, um, is something that I think like I've lived with. I have had so many conversations with friends and family colleagues in similar situations where there is not this internal support, and sometimes that can make it even harder to look to the systems for support when your own internal supposed support structure is not there for you. Um, and I can't even, be completely angry because when folks are socialized to not trust their system because it's not working for them, because it's not supporting them, that can be easily passed on to the next generation, and make it even harder to try and step into these spaces and do this extra level of work to try and change these systems. And I felt that space of having to go the extra mile and you have to step out of your comfort zone more to put that labor in. And it's a lot of labor that is put in to try and change these systems. And it's not fair that there is often a lot of labor from marginalized folks to be the ones to speak out. But I think having conversations like this is so important to recognize that, historically, these systems have not been helpful. They have been actively detrimental, and rather than being upset about it, we have to look at the ways that we can make small changes in our communities. How can we connect to people? How can we reach out to folks in positions of leadership? How do we get ourselves into these spaces to fight back against these detrimental actions? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Shanice. I think you touched on something, both of you, you and Carmel, about kind of having to put your whole self when it comes to engaging in these systems, these policies, and it's exhausting, because they weren't built in a way to be able to work with the identities that you embody. And that leads into things like your lived experience of it all. I am curious then, how can lived experience and representation be meaningfully embedded into leadership policy and program design beyond consultation? I know, Carmel, you kind of brought that in with the circles and the consultations you're doing with the City of Ottawa. But Terrence, I'd love to hear something from your side.
I would say beyond just like having consulting with those with lived experience, I would say a meaningful way to embed would be to focus on hiring those with lived experience. And then not in like a tokenistic or like a KPI driven way, because I have been in organizations that actually have KPIs on their dashboards about this. I would say that's a big no-no. but really truly valuing the person's lived experience. So, for example, like as a family caregiver and having known a lot of other family caregivers too, we have transferable skill sets. For example, in project management, stakeholder management, coordination skills, like all of these skills as caregivers are valuable assets to any organization. So, so I think it's important that we, as leaders in organizations and in companies, to recognize these skill sets so that we just embed these lived experience and with these valuable skill sets into the organizations that we operate. Um, and there are examples of companies that have done like and are working like towards these things. So, for example, like SC Health does a great job with supporting caregivers because they know that SC Health being a organization that provides care, they have double duty caregivers who are providing care to clients, but then also providing care to family members, and they have support that supports them. I think Green Shield also does a great job. Sun Life, right? There's a lot of great organizations out there that are examples of how we could meaningfully embed those with lived experience into the workplace. Um, and this also same goes for organizations, and Bianca has firsthand experience with like special return, right? Like hiring people with disabilities and then embedding those disabilities into the workplace. So I think there's a lot of great examples of it. It's just now how do we educate and expand and demonstrate to more organizations across the country to show that there's a lot of value in bringing people into the organizations because of the value that we bring.
Yeah, thanks so much, Terrence. I think it's a balance too, right? I think something we also have to be cognitive and aware of is that yes, these people may be a part of your organizations and truly embedded, let's say within your communities, but we also can't lean on them to be providing um, that thought, that idea, the opinion, because that's in a way kind of burdensome too. That's not what they're hired to do in some scenarios, right? So it's about making sure you're finding that balance, engaging them in a way that's meaningful, maybe leveraging those very powerful transferable skills as a caregiver, like you shared, and showing that in a way and making it a more whole version. Terrence, you look like you have more to say.
I fully agree because not everyone
Not
wants to say,
everyone wants.
hey, I'm a caregiver and I'm gonna like offer my lived experience. So I think in those instances where if a organization or a company really wants a caregiver involved or someone with disability involved in designing or co-designing something, then there should be additional compensation for the value that that person brings for that particular, be it co-design or product design that they're working on beyond the role that they're playing in the organization. So yeah, I do agree.
Perfect. Kamal, I want to ask you this question as well because we did talk about lived experience and some of the things you've already touched on, but is there anything else you want to add on to this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, the consult is an area that needs some attention, and of course, those that are working in the field of health care, I mean, they're overburdened by, well, I'm going to say, paperwork and documents and making sure that policies are completely filled. But in the human experience of being human and trying to make your way through a very colonial based system is daunting. I mean, many people, unless I know in the indigenous communities, often we go as groups because the power that's in our capacity to work together in community is significant. And so when it comes to policies, often within the mainstream system, I think maybe looking deeper at we're all holding different roles and we're doing different parts in wherever we work and whatever we do in the world. But it's also to look at a little bit deeper to understand how did we end up with these policies? Where did they come from? Why are they, um, what makes them tick? Instead of having the client or the persons who are in need of support to figure that out. So there are many, many blocks to why would one person get something and then, and I've seen this in community, and another person looking for the same services will not get it. Uh, which is we talked a little bit about why some of those things happen, but ultimately, I'm going to go back to the understanding that in the indigenous world and the genocidal acts that have gone on in this country, the objective of the colonizer was to keep us separate and to create division amongst us. And that in doing that, it created us having to seek out identity and to try and figure out where we belong, how we belong, these complex systems of what we have a right to, what we should be experiencing in terms of care. And ultimately, there are so many roadblocks that need to be uncovered and taken apart. And yes, unfortunately, it falls on those that are working in the field of trying to get recognition and accessibility to why this works the way it does. And again, in the indigenous, the truth and reconciliation is based on the fact that we need to have difficult conversations. And I'm feeling this is an amazing platform for having those conversations because there are so many of us with lived experiences that often don't get looked at because we have ways that we've worked through life in the mainstream system that is based often on people's capacity to have spaces that are safe enough for people to go to and communicate and share, well, I'm going through this, or I don't know how to deal with this. You know what I mean? So that on a system of policies, it has to be reached that the people that are at the top in that hierarchy system need to be sitting at the table and nothing about us without us. This needs to be an action, not just an expression that, again, tokenism, and I know we're going to talk about that later, but ultimately we need action now. And it takes all of us to work together to do that. So thank you.
Absolutely, Carmel. Something that struck me that you said was about you with the policies and the systems that were made during the colonization that Canada experienced. It really forced the Indigenous people to seek out their identity, and that's a traumatic experience. Anyone that has to feel like they have to hide a piece of their identity or have to kind of forget it in a way, to be kind of nice way of putting it, is a very traumatic experience. So keeping in mind that these systems are based and built off of trauma, how do we, or what type of approach can we look at for accessibility? So like what does a trauma-informed approach look like? And how is that practiced? Shanice, do you have an answer for that?
I have an answer. I think this is a question that has many answers. Um, I would like to say that when it comes to a trauma-informed approach, I'm coming at this from a lot of different spaces. I initially learned about a trauma-informed approach through learning about trauma-informed reporting and journalism from Carleton, and then a lot of safer space trainings, anti-oppression training, and all of that on top of lived experience and professional experience. And I think that when it comes to a trauma-informed approach, it really is that blend of things that helps to make a difference. You can do all the trainings and you can have all the examples, but um, it really comes to like empathy and taking time to understand where people are coming from. And that's something that I try and do in all aspects of my work. In accessibility, this can look like a lot of things. I think there are a lot of examples that I would love to give, and because I literally could talk about this forever, but I will try and keep things concise. Um, One of the like simplest ways that I like to put this is there's a quote that always comes to me is everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about. That has been at the core of looking at a trauma informed approach for me for probably a decade. And it's because you never know exactly what someone is coming into a room with. Um, Even if, and this is the case for trauma, this is the case for disability, for lived experience, you don't know just by looking at someone what they've gone through, what they're dealing with, what difficulties they might have, what experiences they have. And taking the time to check in with folks can really make a huge difference. A huge shout out to Propeller for teaching me this specific tool is that the professional company, every rehearsal, they start with a check in, going around in a circle, and usually there's a question, and it can be, they're open ended. It could be, what color do you feel like today? What animal do you feel like? If you were a body of water, what body of water would you be today? What element of nature heals you? And these open ended questions are creative. They allow for metaphor to come into play, they allow for the dancers to take a moment and check in with themselves and then be able to share that with everyone in the space. And every time I've seen this in practice, it has made such a difference because just from that initial question, you learn more about where people are at. So if someone's coming in having a rough day, if they're coming in feeling low energy, something's feeling off in the body, having a tough mental health day, maybe there was something traumatic that happened recently and they're still reeling from it. Even if they're not saying it directly, these metaphorical questions can help to give a little bit of insight into a person's individual experience. And then sometimes if people want to share more, they do. Um, I think a check in circle is also really great from a position of leadership because it allows for the people you're working with to also see that you're human and that you're coming in with your own experiences. I feel like there's often this expectation that if you're in a position of leadership, you need to be behind this wall and you're the leader, you have to be in charge and you can't show any weakness. And I think people feel a lot safer to share where they are at. And if they need help and support, if they also see that you have vulnerabilities and that you have failings as well, because no one's perfect. Um, and these check-ins are great for that in so many ways. When it comes to accessibility, just like literally across the board, especially if you're dealing with competing access needs and you don't know what those access needs might be on the day, this is a great way to get that information right off the bat. Um, and, oftentimes you come back around at the end of rehearsal and then there's a checkout, maybe coming back to the question so you can know how things have shifted, how things have changed throughout the day. And having this openness and conversation really allows for folks to feel comfortable enough to bring questions, to bring thoughts, to bring issues, especially in any work where you're dealing with potentially triggering or traumatic subjects. In my theater work, I've worked on some dark things, and so sometimes it can feel like a lot. And one of the practices that I have used and have seen used to great success is even if you're sitting at a desk and it's more of a official kind of formal thing, get everyone to get up and shake out their bodies, let go of whatever you've been discussing so that people aren't taking it with them. And that helps to release the emotions, to allow folks to reflect on what's been discussed and not sit in it. Um, Having things like sharing the agenda beforehand so that if there are any issues that might come up, before it even starts. Check in afterwards. Like take the time. I think that's the biggest thing, really, with a trauma-informed approach is it's about taking the time and care to really be there and be present with the people that you're working with, and taking into account their individual experiences. Thanks.
Thank- Thanks, Shanice. I think it's also about taking the time, but it's also about taking space almost too, right? In kind of the systems we have, the society we operate in, I think sometimes we don't give ourselves the grace to take space and time and check in with others and ourselves because it's like we're going on to the next thing. So I think that taking space element is a part of that, taking it all in. Um, you kind of touched on how this is a bit of a community-centered approach, but how can organizations ensure their work is truly community-centered rather than tokenistic? I'll start with Terrence here, if that's okay.
So I've seen and worked with companies that, for example, develop like websites or like on digital products or even like physical products. And the thing that surprises me a lot of times is when asked the question around, like, oh, did you test it with the users that will be using this? So it could be it, someone that's aging or someone with disability, and a lot of times the answer is no. Um, so I think when or sometimes they may say like, oh yeah, I think we like asked one person to like test it, and to me that's kind of like very tokenistic in that way. It's like, oh yeah, we checked with one person, it looked okay, we're just gonna like release it or launch it. So I think the opportunity here is to focus more on co-design or co-development, um, and really value these lived experience, kind of like what we just talked about earlier, and then also compensating the person fairly for that lived experience in co-designing and creating, be it the products or the services that the organization is wanting to use to serve the people that they're designing for. Um, so I'd say that's one example, and then for me personally, I'd say uh, I've been very lucky working with different organizations as a caregiver that they've been very community centered. So like seeing me as not just someone in the company, but recognizing that, oh, I'm also a caregiver. So when I had to take on a lot of caregiving work, my current company that I work with, they like reminded me, it's like, hey, we got your back. Like you go take care of your family. Like we'll make sure that our team like is able to like back you up when you're away. And to me, I think that was, yeah, like yes, it came from leadership, but I think that's like uh, something that we need to just remember as leaders in the and or our organizations, taking that kind of community centered approach that we are more than just the employee of the company, but we have all these identities and roles that we play in our family and in our communities too.
Thanks, Terrence. I think you touched on something really important, and we see a lot of this in the accessibility and disability space, is that one experience is one experience. You can't generalize that an individual's experience with a particular disability or a particular experience blankets the entire community, right? And I think the idea of co-designing is so important because if you get individuals who identify or know that they have, let's say, a similar disability, they can speak to what their experience is like. And I think that's so important when it comes to a community approach, is because it is a community. There's different experiences. There's different intersecting identities, which I defined earlier, that an individual who maybe is experienced one disability and has a cultural heritage that is maybe a little bit conflicting or collides with it is a very different experience than someone else. So I think that co-designing piece is so important. Go ahead,
I
Terrence.
think I think one thing that I hear from a lot of like companies or organizations who are trying to like design products and stuff like that is they're like, oh, we don't know where to go to find those with experience to actually help us. So I guess one example, and this is perhaps like niche, would be like for digital products and stuff, it'd be like, oh, an organization, a company like Fable, um, to go to them for that kind of support. Uh, I don't think it really exists in kind of like the hardware or more like tangible product space, but certainly then Fable is like a leader in kind of like more of that like UX, UI experience side of things.
Yeah, that's fair. I'd also make the argument, and maybe this is a little tough. Maybe you're not looking hard enough. And I'm just gonna say that right there. Shanice, do you have any thoughts on community-centered type approaches to avoid tokenistic ones?
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree on the maybe you're not looking hard enough. I feel like that is often the case. People do the initial Google search, and then if they don't find something that's easy for them, then they just give up. And I'm going to touch on this more from the arts organization perspective. But I've seen so many pilot programs, short contract jobs that are specifically targeted to marginalized communities. It's like if you are BIPOC, disabled, queer, please apply for this job, which is great. Opportunities are great, but a lot of the times they are, a contract for 6 months. Maybe if you're lucky, it's a year, but they don't come with extension options. There are very few connections to leadership in multiple organizations to help gain skills to continue growing afterwards. A lot of these positions are entry level positions. And if you have an organization where the majority of BIPOC and disabled and queer and marginalized voices are in entry level positions, you're not doing enough. It's really that's when it's tokenistic because it looks good for them when they put marginalized folks in front of the camera. I have seen so many organizations where all of the marginalized folks who work for them are in communications positions because it's front facing, because it looks good for the optics, and it does nothing for them to actually expand their skill sets, to actually gain skills that they can use to become leaders themselves. It's not doing anything to help train the next generation, basically, to do more, to be able to connect more. Um, and this is when things are tokenistic. It's not based in mutual respect. And I think that's really the big thing is that in practice, bringing in community driven focus when it comes to intersectionality and intersecting identities and bringing in multiple perspectives comes from respect and comes from creating opportunities that benefit all parties. It's community partnerships where organizations bring in artists and highlight their work and pay them well for it. It's leadership trainings that give networking events with a bunch of leaders in the field so that they can connect and find ways to find jobs that are going to actually elevate them within the field. Um, this is bringing in folks from intersecting identities, not picking your, great, we have our Indigenous person, we have one disabled person, we have one queer person. We're not boxes to be ticked. We're people with individual intersecting identities that need to be addressed. And the more that organizations bring in folks with intersecting identities, the more nuanced and the more brilliant, really, the perspectives are. It just there's so much richness in perspective that we are lacking because the time and effort is not being taken to elevate the vast variety of voices that exist. Thanks.
Thanks, Shanice. I really love what you said. It was about like mutual respect, right? Especially about those individuals who are in entry level roles. If you really respected them, you're looking at how do you ensure their career growth, which is what you mentioned. How are you ensuring the path to their success is there? And I think, and I truly believe that when you invest in people and you're invested in their growth and their strengths and all that, they're going to give it back to you because they want to, you invested in that respect, right? So we did talk about kind of the negatives, the tokenistics, but I would love to dig into what are some community-centered practices or approach in accessibility that have been meaningful that you've seen out in the community or the spaces that you worked in. Carmel, if you're okay, I'd like to start with you.
Well, a number of spaces that was one of the reasons why I ended up organizing the No Borders Art Festival, and it was to bring everyone together who could come together in the arts, in music, in being in expression and discussions that we've held and conversations together where oftentimes It might not be led by a thematic, okay, how can we change the world kind of stuff, but we would sit together and through our intersectionalities would be able to discuss some really important aspects of what it meant to be living in community. And community is really interesting because there's more than um, just that. There's many other aspects, and I'm going to say it. You know, food is an exceptional ability to bring people together and give access to many things. There's many things that happen over food. It's extremely important in the indigenous communities, and so in working in community most of my life, it definitely has to be, and to transfer those skills into a mainstream colonial platform concepts of uh, um, staying away from tokenism is quite the challenge for many because it's almost like it's part of the programming that happens within context to the mainstream system. Okay, check. Uh, the significance of people being able to share their story and be respected, whether you agree with something or not. It's the capacity for us to have compassion with each other and to be kind to each other and to be able to, realize that it's critical that we ask people, is there anything you want to tell us? Is there anything you want to share? For organizations to be reaching outside of themselves. If your nest of people can't figure out something, is to go to, and you already said it, Bianca, with regards to Terence, I'm going back to, it's a lot of work for a lot of people. But again, the higher ups in any of these systems they know what's required. Whether or not they're going to do the work is another question. But it's about how to, because we look at life certainly with systems, and when I think of community centers and working in community, it's not about the profits that people are going to be making in community centers. The profits are in the human resources and our capacity to support each other to move forward. And so a lot of that, I think people often in organizations are given the platform, the script, and well, it doesn't always work out for those of us who are stepping outside of that script and wanting to do more, but oftentimes get burnt out because it's too much weight. And so, yeah, I think bringing the community into those systems is really important, which is what I attempt to do because I'm on the University of Ottawa campus and it's all students, and I want to create bridges between the students' knowledge and community knowledge. So,
Thank you, Carmel. When you said food, I smiled because it is such a connector. I mean, I think about my like heritage as a Filipino. There's always a lot of food, there's always a lot of leftovers, and admittedly, it does feel a little stereotypical about it. However, it is such a connector. We always gather around food, and it's such a great way to connect. Um, Terrence, any examples from your end?
I would say accessibility, like meaningful accessibility, is about, yeah, connection. I kind of like all those examples. So I guess from my personal experience, it's like when we were navigating care for our mom, for example, it was incredible that her care coordinator went the extra mile to seek out a Cantonese speaking like community care nurse for her, so that then our mom felt safe in our own home, and then also there's a sense of comfort when someone speaks your language, especially that you need care from. And so that nurse actually ended up not only caring for our mom, but then our brother twice. And I still stay in touch with her to this day. And so there's that like really sense of like meaningful connection, that this one person has made such a great impact on our family. Um, and then another example related to care too is how, and for whatever reason, palliative care teams do a phenomenal job around this too. where even though they didn't speak the language, they made the effort as it seems like it's part of a lot of palliative teams that they just made the effort to ensure that our mom was well taken care of and that she was comfortable and that her heart was well and so really the meaningful practice is when the system sees the person not just like the barrier of the language or the person's diagnosis or the person's disability, and really it's about creating a sense of belonging when people are, yeah, typically at their most vulnerable, especially in the care and healthcare setting.
Yeah, thanks, Terrence. I think that made me think about how you find examples in some of the most unexpected places, such as palliative care, but at the same time, this is when an individual is most vulnerable. So you want them to feel that community, the things that are familiar to them, if you will. Shanice, thoughts on this question?
Sure, yeah. I want to come back to what Cromwell said earlier about sharing the load. I think that's one of the things that really comes to me when talking about, community-centered practice. We've talked a bit about, how much labor it is, to go out into spaces and to have to push for like big systemic change. And I have seen this in big ways. I've seen it in small ways of folks using the privilege that they do have. And I feel like, there are different privileges for different people in certain spaces. And even just using that tiny bit of a leg up to create space and to open the door to communication can mean so much. Um, and like one of those things is like I have a partner who works in the government, and she, at any point that she can, will use her training and her connections to bring in discussion of disability because she's got an invisible disability, but knows that if she doesn't say something, then it's not helping anybody, least of all herself. And I think, and this is something that I see among my friends, I see in my artistic community, I see in my work community that, everyone is just trying to do the little things, to use the spaces that we are in to bring conversations to the forefront, even when they are difficult, of, how, of taking that time to kind of use the unassuming moments, to say the tough thing. And I feel like that can often bring the biggest change.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shanice. Um, the example about your partner made me really think about, and to almost tie it up, we're talking about intersectionality here and intersecting identities. And in some cases, I don't want to broad strokes this, is that there are some identities that definitely have a little more privilege or power associated to them. So it's about leaning into them and then bringing everyone else along to the journey. And it sounds like that's what it is, right? Um, I want to thank our three panelists here so much for their thoughts, their insights, their lived experience, everything here. And to kind of summarize three things that I've kind of pulled from this panel, and then we'll go into some questions, is number one is that really engage the community. We said one for one experience is not one experience. There's a lot about community and having that circular experience, bringing that circle together, as Carmel kind of mentioned. The second one is taking space, and whether that's a check-in, individually or as a group, or just taking space in general. And the third is about connection and mutual respect. And I think that's what we all want at the end of the day. We want connection with people who maybe identify with the identities we have, but we also want connection with people who don't, and that they take the time, the space, and provide that mutual respect to really navigate that. So again, thank you to the three of you. I deeply appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to Julie now to help us with the Q&A period.
Thank you, Bianca, and thank you to our panelists here today. What a powerful and really informative conversation. And I also want to thank Bianca for jumping in for me at the beginning. I didn't get a chance to do my intro, but I do work here at the Accessibility Institute at Carleton University and get to oversee the great work we do with the Canadian Accessibility Network. And so thank you to each of our panelists as well. It is now time for questions. If you're comfortable doing so, you're welcome to type your questions into the chat, or if you would like to raise your virtual hand or actual hand, we will keep an eye out and facilitate some questions with our panelists. We'll take maybe about 10 minutes to do so if there's questions to pursue, and then we'll wrap up. Would anybody like to ask our panelists anything? Just taking a look here to see if there's any hands. We'll give a moment just in case anybody is typing. I'm not seeing anything at the moment. Would either of any of you, Meg has got a question. What happens when taking space for one person feels like losing space for someone else? And how can we support the navigation of these tensions? I'll open that up to anybody from the panel.
I'm happy to start.
Sure. Thank you, Shanice.
Yeah, no problem. That's a great question. And I feel like this comes back to what I touched on a little bit of competing access needs. Because it can be very difficult to navigate. And I think when it comes to taking space, I feel like it starts personally, of creating the space so that if people need to come to you, either individually or within the group, then they can. But I also recognize that, within this, sometimes there does end up being more labor on the person in leadership, and it is more work, but it takes more time. But I think it's worth it to have that availability before or after meetings to be able to check in with people one-on-one, and really hear what they're feeling. And if someone's feeling like they're losing space, is it because they're not getting the chance to share their perspectives? I think in a check-in circle, everyone should have equal amount of time to be able to share. Although sometimes it depends on the day. Sometimes someone is going to need more one day and someone will need less. And I think there has to be some flexibility and openness to recognize that not every day is going to be the same. And in hearing where everyone's coming from, there might be days where there is tension there. And if it's a direct tension between two people, sometimes, some mediation and communication between folks is needed. And sometimes it can be just an individual check-in to affirm that you are listening and that you do care about everyone's perspectives. It's just caring for and addressing their perspectives and their needs in different moments so that there is a level of focus for everyone as needed.
Thank you, Shanice. Carmel or Terrence, do either of you have anything you'd like to add?
I think I could, it's interesting, right? What is space? I mean, I think we need to look at what space is, and ultimately, there needs to be some integration in a system where somebody feels like they're losing space because you're gaining space. I mean, these are two directions that really, is that what happens in space? Again, understanding what space is really important. Often in the Indigenous world, we talk about holding space for each other. But this is because there are practices and protocols that go on continually with understanding that we are not one individual, that we are collectively all connected. So in giving someone space or someone taking space, all of us are equally sharing in that experience. It's not a separate entity unto itself. In other words, if we take care of ourselves first, then we're taking care of everyone else as well. So sometimes what happens in the mainstream colonial precepts is that there's often competition and tension between those that feel they're missing out on their opportunity to be able to maybe heal or just simply be in a space where there's no demands being made of them
Mm.
whatsoever. Um, so I think that there has to be a practice in a space long before somebody needs that space to be able to say, um, where are we at? What's going on? How can we change the atmosphere that we're in and make sure that we all give each other space so that we can figure out what's going on, either individually or in the community. Um, and sometimes competing oppressions can come into play depending on our intersectionality and the accessibility that some of us are privileged to have and then others are not. So it takes a bit of, from my perspective and working in community, often that's why the circle is so critical, because you can figure out where there needs to be more supports put and how we can help each other.
Mhm. Beautiful answer. Thank you, Carmel. Terrence, did you have anything to add? We do have one more question, but I would love to give you a chance. No? Okay. Or Bianca?
Yeah, no.
No? Okay. No. All right. A question from Zelda, an open-ended question about tech implications. What might be the impacts of AI or LLM and resources such as ChatGPT, Perplexity, Microsoft Copilot towards fostering opportunity and engagement and participation and having access to such tools? Again, open to anyone. Terrence.
So at the beginning, we talked about things like barriers. So, for example, like language or medical jargon. So I think with access to technology like AI, and we haven't really seen it yet applied like in the healthcare system yet, but certainly an opportunity to apply in those particular settings where if it's a language barrier and AI could then help with the translation. So then the person who is receiving the care can also see and understand what's being said, even though maybe a caregiver is with them. And then also with the medical language and jargon and being able to then translate that into more simpler terms for the family members and the person receiving care could understand. So I think AI, there's certainly a lot of these neat applications that could help reduce a lot of barriers. Um, and then also in terms of, for example, if someone lives with a disability and needs to perhaps like the speed at which is required to do certain work, we're now seeing things like utilizing AI agents to really help speed up with that process. So that creates some equity in uh, all of us who are in the workforce to then be able to then work and complete things as required. So I think, yeah, I really think that uh, AI tools like the ChatGPTs and the AI agents would be able to help in reducing all these barriers that we're seeing still.
Yeah, thank you, Terrence. And Shanice has put in the chat to sort of complement what you're saying. Access writers can also be an amazing tool to understand people's needs and help create space and help with different intersecting identities and access needs. There is a fantastic informational tool to help build access writers, askjan.org. And what we'll do is we'll capture that URL and we'll share it in our wrap up email post event and make sure everybody gets access to that as well. Thank you, Shanice.
Julie, I'd love to answer that
Yeah,
question.
please do.
I think there are two things. One is this is an unintentional plug, but the employment community of practice is looking at assistive technology, and one of the things that I've touched on is how does AI play a role in that? And we're still learning. We're in our information gathering phase. Having said that, I think there is an opportunity because we're talking about how do we ensure people are successful in their place of work, in their career, in whatever they want to pursue. And AI has an opportunity to provide that support to be success, whatever it looks like. On the other end, and this brings me back to the 5-year anniversary event where we had the AI panel, and
Mhm.
something that really stuck out to me, in order for AI to be successful and an opportunity to provide that support, is we need proper data that represents the communities. And whether that's the disability community, whether that's specific cultural races, identities, sexual orientations, we need that representation because that's the only way it's going to provide the support and opportunities that we hope for. So just some two things that came to top of mind when that question popped up.
Nice. Excellent. Thank you, Bianca. Are there any other questions as we come to the end of our time together today? Panelists, any last thoughts, reflections as we wrap up? Oh, Carmel looks like she has.
Just such an amazing group of all of us getting together. I'm very grateful, but I also see the largeness of this conversation. Talk about gathering. And connecting with each other, literally and on every other level. Really, quite something to have this kind of access to conversations are critical for so many. So thank you. I'm very grateful to be here.
Thank you, Carmel. We've got one extra question that just came in. And we've got a couple minutes. So I'm gonna ask it. This is from Fatima. How can organizations move beyond surface level inclusion to create a real culture shift, one where intersectional representation isn't just present, but actually influences decisions, priorities, and power structures? And I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but if there's anything more to add to this conversation, I'd love to hear it. Shanice?
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to add a little bit. One of the biggest things on this is I think it really starts in the hiring practices. Take the time to incorporate elements like prioritizing lived experience as well as educational experience. That can be such a huge barrier for folks when looking at applying for jobs. I have seen tools like in a job application saying, we're looking for someone who has around 5 years of experience in this field, but it's not just about the education. If you have comparable experience from lived experience or from transferable skills, or if you have done informal training, or even if you don't meet all of the qualifications, like suggestions that if you have, if you can meet 70% of the expectations, of the skill set required for this job, apply anyways. Like giving that openness for folks to apply in what could be perceived as like above their skill set, because oftentimes it's not. People are adaptable, and I think there's a lot of space for really embedding intersectional perspectives when the hiring practices themselves are more diverse and are more open to allow people from all identities to apply. And especially when these applications are for positions that have chances of extension of a contract, or this is embedding someone in your staff, not just for a short period of time, but bringing folks in, even if they're new, into those rooms of leadership, into those rooms where decisions are happening. If you're making decisions and you want multiple perspectives, you have to open up the room and bring in all of these perspectives. Invite teams to board meetings so that they can give their perspectives as well and really help that systemic change.
Thank you so much, Shanice. And that's actually a really great segue into our wrap up, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Meg, I see you have another question. Maybe what we'll do, just for the sake of time, is we'll get an answer and we'll put that in writing in our follow-up email that we send out to everybody. But I do want to take a moment to, first of all, thank Bianca as our facilitator today, Shanice, Carmel, and Terrence. Just beautiful conversation. Thank you for being so open and transparent and vulnerable about sharing your perspectives on this conversation. As I mentioned, we do these CAN Connect forums quite regularly here through the CAN National Office. And in connection to what Shanice was just talking about, on Tuesday, May 23rd, will be our next CAN Connect forum. And it's a discussion around accessibility is a leadership competence. So I think that would be a really interesting conversation to continue some of what you were just talking about there as well. And so we invite you to consider registering. I think Ken has put the link in our chat. And if you're interested in learning more about CAN and you're not already actively involved in the network, please feel free to visit our website. And Ken, please put that link in the chat. And consider getting involved or reach out, and we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you once again to everybody and to our guests who've joined us today. We had a really great large group of about 75 people, and really excited to share this conversation. Have a spectacular rest of your day wherever you are.